Welcome back, y'all. I'm fresh off a trip to Miami Beach and I'm feeling refreshed and ready. It's the perfect day for me to tackle one of the most difficult topics for nearly every business leader and owner. So let's dive right in. Today, we're talking reductions in force and layoffs. And before you say, I will never do that, I recommend you keep listening because life changes. Finances change. The economy and politics make their impact. And sometimes it's time to sell the biz, to downsize and move to Puerto Rico. So deciding when to reduce your workforce is a significant and very challenging decision for any organization. Let's talk about some key indicators and steps to help you determine if it's time for you to consider reducing your workforce. So first key indicator is financial performance. We're talking declining revenue and decreasing profit margins. A sustained decline in revenue that cannot be addressed through other cost-saving measures is a huge indicator. So you've already gone through, maybe you've had somebody like me come in and do a P&L audit. You've looked at all of the tools, resources, and tech that you have. You've looked for redundant contract terms. You have tightened the belt on office supplies. You've narrowed down on like travel and entertainment expenses. You have got consistent commission agreements across folks. You have cleaned up in all of those areas and you still have a declining revenue. That's a yellow to red flag right there. Next is if profit margins are shrinking despite efforts to reduce non-personnel costs. So we've still got our profit margins decreasing. We've got our declining revenue. These are two big red financial flags to look at. The next key indicator is operational efficiency. You've got overstaffing and then you've got redundant roles. If there are too many employees relative to the volume of work, this leads to underutilization of resources. So one of the things I did at an organization before was I essentially took every single employee, looked to see how much of the organizational revenue they were attached to. And I've got some suggestions on how you could do this. You want to level set that as much as possible. If you've got employees who are not pulling their weight, I would encourage you to try to pull a better card. There's a lot of different things you can look at there, but overstaffing is huge. Also redundancy in roles. So when there are duplicated roles or functions due to restructuring, mergers, or changes in processes. So especially if you've taken on another organization and you kept both people because they were both good, that's great. That makes you a nice person. That doesn't make you a savvy business person. I know these are tough decisions, but we want to take a look at these operational efficiencies. The third key indicator that it's time to take a look at this is economic downturns. Talking about market conditions and industry trends. So prolonged economic downturns affect demand, obviously, for your products and services. Also changes in industry standards or technological advancements make certain jobs obsolete. We've all been talking about AI and how it impacts our business. There are so many people who are afraid of AI for this reason. It's not a reason to be afraid of AI. We can use AI, artificial intelligence, for some of those entry-level tasks. And I'd be happy to share with you how I utilize it in my business or ways that I've seen other business owners or clients that I've made recommendations to. That means that we can get to the work that is more important, has a higher ROI, but those market conditions, they're going to be a key indicator that maybe it's time to reduce our force. The fourth key indicator is strategic realignment. We're talking shifts in business strategy and product line changes. So changing strategic goals that require different skill sets or a leaner organization, or discontinuing or scaling back certain products or services. Both reasons why you would want to reevaluate the size of your staff and just determine what it is you actually need to produce what you've got. I know it feels really good when we build a dynasty. It feels good for me too. I totally get that. But at the end of the day, if you're not making any money, then it doesn't matter much at all anymore, does it? Fifth key indicator are performance issues. We're talking low productivity or overly high labor costs. So consistent underperformance or low productivity across the workforce, or labor costs that are disproportionately high compared to industry standards. So needing some benchmark data here. Now, I don't like to leave you with all concept and theory. So let's move into practical steps to evaluate and implement during a workforce reduction. The first thing you're going to need to do is assess the need. So conduct that thorough financial analysis to understand the impact of labor costs on your bottom line. Also, reviewing that operational data to identify areas of inefficiency or overstaffing. So first, we're just doing an assessment, and we are not really telling anyone at this point. I know I've done another episode on the pod about communication, but this right here, we are keeping this to ourselves. This is you as the business owner and your CFO or your controller. You're just doing a thorough analysis right now to identify potential needs. This may mean that you do a thorough analysis and you say we're at the exact right spot. So we don't want to create fear unintentionally or unnecessarily. So we're taking a look at the financial analysis and then the operational data. The next step to help us evaluate and implement is considering other alternatives. So exploring other cost savings measures, such as cutting discretionary spending, renegotiating your contracts, like I mentioned before, implementing temporary salary reductions, considering no increases for the next year, making sure that we're aligned when it comes to other cost savings measures. And then another alternative we can do is considering non-layoff options like voluntary retirements, not replacing roles after natural attrition, or temporary furloughs, meaning we are retaining them as an employee, but we're reducing their hours, or we're doing short-term lack of work assignments. So we're just asking them to take a week off, unpaid, things like that. Okay, so let's say that we assessed the need, we did the financial analysis, we reviewed the operational data, we considered alternatives, we looked at cost savings measures, we dug into our P&L, we looked at all of our contracts, all of our technologies, all of our tools and resources. We said we've cut everything that we can, and we've also considered non-layoff options like voluntary retirements, not replacing attrition, and temporary furloughs. We've done all of that. We're ready for the next step, and that's planning the reduction. So first, we're going to identify which roles or departments would be affected based on strategic priorities and our operational needs. We are removing people's names from this part in the process. This is important, you guys. If you're really going to take a true subjective approach to this, then we've got to remove the names associated. I know it's tough. We've got leaders that have been in our organization. They've been loyal to us. We've got real relationships with them. We're removing the names. We are looking at roles and departments based on strategic priorities and operational needs. Then we're going to develop a clear and fair selection process for deciding which employees will be laid off. So, and I'll talk later about legal implications that you need to consider, but we have to be fair in this or you're going to end up in the news. Not to mention, we want to be fair, right? We care about people. This is a hard decision, but we also want to stay out of the news. This is going to be a hard enough process. Okay, so speaking of four are going to be our fourth step in this process is our legal and ethical considerations. This is ensuring compliance with labor laws and regulations regarding layoffs, severance options, considering the ethical implications as well, and aiming to handle the process with empathy and respect. I'm going to keep going through the steps in the process, but I'm going to do a deeper dive later on in this episode to go further into the legal implications you need to consider. Okay, fifth step in the process is going to be communication. We want to prepare a clear communication plan to inform affected employees and other stakeholders. And we want to identify who those stakeholders are and develop our communication plan around timing. We also, during this step in the process, want to provide support for those being laid off, such as outplacement services, counseling, or severance packages. Stay tuned until the end so that way I can try to help you with that as well. Next step is implementation. So we want to execute the layoffs in accordance with your plan. ensuring all legal requirements are met. Don't vary from the plan. Okay. This is going to keep you safe, protected, and make sure that the process is fair through and through. We're also going to communicate the changes to the remaining workforce to address concerns and to maintain morale. That's going to be clutch. This is going to impact your culture. It just is. And so you have to be very intentional in this area. And then lastly, we are going to do a post-reduction review. So we've went through the process. We assessed it. We looked at alternatives. We went ahead and decided to do it. We maintained our legal stance. We've communicated it. Now we're going to do our post-reduction review, monitoring the impact of the workforce reduction on our business performance. So we're going to take a look at likely monthly and then 30, 60, 90 days post workforce reduction. Of course, we've got to keep in mind if we're offering severance packages, we're not going to see a giant hit immediately. This is a long-term strategy. These are not short-term strategies. We're messing with people's lives here. These are long-term strategies. Maintaining that post-reduction analysis and then making adjustments as needed to ensure the organization remains on track with its strategic goals. And of course, that the culture is paid attention to. All right, next, let's walk through the potential legal implications in more depth of this decision and what you needed to consider. Now, I know I have a disclaimer on this podcast, but I'm going to pause right here and say I am not an HR labor attorney. I've worked with many of them. I've utilized many of them. I've been a client to many of them. I have a few as strategic advisors, but I am not an attorney. So you need to contact an attorney if you're going to be doing a workforce reduction or a layoff. I highly recommend that. You need to have an attorney on retainer anyway. And I've got a few recommendations of partners that I've got that can help you with that. But that said, I'm going to give you a general overview of some legal things to consider. So when we're processing through the idea of a workforce reduction, it's crucial to understand and comply with the relevant legal implications to avoid potential legal issues and to ensure fair treatment of employees. And honestly, it's going to keep us out of TikTok world as well, because people are getting put on blast. You don't want that to be you. So here are the key legal considerations. The first one is employment laws and regulations. Let's run through a couple here. So federal labor laws that this is going to impact. In the U.S., we need to be familiarizing ourselves with laws such as the FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. WARN is what that's called. So there are requirements, state and federal, as far as letting employees know what's happening, especially if they're being eliminated. We want to make sure that we're following those laws. Next are our state and local laws. So there are state-specific regulations that provide additional protections or requirements beyond federal laws. You need to know what you're working with in the state that you're working in. Okay, then next, let's go a little bit deeper into that WARN Act, that Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. So there's a notice period. The WARN Act requires employers with 100 or more employees. So I'm talking mid to larger employers here, 100 or more employees, to provide a 60 days advance notice in cases of mass layoffs or plant closings affecting 50 or more employees at a single site of employment. Exceptions to this are unforeseeable business circumstances and natural disasters. So if you're an employer listening to this, I'm going to tell you there's ways around almost everything. If you're an employee listening to this, know your rights and press up against that. You're in a hard situation. So on both sides of the table here, we need to know our laws and what our rights are as an employee and an employer. Okay, let's go deeper into anti-discrimination laws. Couple ones we want to talk about here. Let's jump into 4 of them specifically. So Title VII, this is the Civil Rights Act. This prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. We also want to look at the ADEA, which is our Age Discrimination and Employment Act. This protects employees aged 40 and older from discrimination. So there's an additional blurb you need to put in a severance agreement or a release if you've got employees that are being impacted of this age. We've got the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. This prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities, of course. And then we've got the EEO, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Compliance. This ensures that the selection process for layoffs does not disproportionately impact protected classes. So I'd make a ton of recommendations to you, but we're going to look at the easiest way to do this. None of this is easy, but the easiest way to do this is to say the shortest tenures are out first, or you can do lowest performers, but make sure that you've got very clear objective standards on performance here, or this one's not going to hold up. Okay, next thing you want to consider from a legal perspective is severance pay and benefits. So I'd recommend everyone gets a severance agreement, and these may be required by your company policy or by the employment contract that you had them sign at the very beginning, or collective bargaining agreements if we're talking about a union environment. So everyone gets a severance agreement. It's just a good thing to do anyway, to give them an option to think through something potentially, like let's say in trade, we are acknowledging what they've given to us as an employer, time of service, and we're acknowledging that. And based on the acknowledgement of that and the pay that we're giving them, we're asking that they sign that they are not going to hold us liable or sue us for any reason because we've treated them fairly. It's just we've got a hard financial situation. We're having to do layoffs. Next is benefits continuation. So under COBRA, which is another law, terminated employees may be entitled to continue their health insurance coverage at their own expense. Just also, word to the wise, if you're not sending out COBRA notifications right now and you provide employee benefits, legally you have to do that. And so anytime an employee is being terminated, you have to mind your P's and Q's with COBRA. That's the law. But especially when you're doing workforce reductions and layoffs, this is something that you want to make sure you have part of your plan. Okay, fifth thing that we want to look at from a legal perspective are employment contracts and collective bargaining agreements. So going back to when we hired these folks, what contractual obligations do we have? We want to review employment contracts for any clauses related to termination and severance. We need to know what it is that we said we were going to honor at the very beginning. If you don't do employment contracts, right now you might be thinking, good, I don't do those contracts, so I don't have to worry about it. That's not actually good. You need employment contracts. We can talk more about why in another episode. Next is any union agreements. So if you are operating in a union environment, you have any employees that are union. If employees are unionized, the collective bargaining agreement likely outlines specific procedures and protections for layoffs. You need to know what that is. Okay, next is record keeping and documentation. So on the documentation side, we need to keep detailed records of the decision-making process. So how we decided who was going to get laid off or reduced, the criteria used for selecting employees for the layoff, and any communications with employees. We're going to package all of that up and save it. Next are performance records. Ensure that performance-related reasons for layoffs are well documented and consistent with past performance evaluations. So we don't want to say, this person's got high rating over and over again, and now all of a sudden they've got this low rating and boom, we did layoffs right after that. That's going to look fishy. Let's make sure that we're keeping things on the up and up. Next are post-layoff legal obligations. So that final paycheck, you need to make sure you're complying with state laws regarding the timing and delivery of the final paycheck when there's a reduction. And also unemployment insurance. You need to inform affected employees about their eligibility for unemployment benefits. This is the right thing to do. Don't skirt around it and just hope they don't realize they're eligible for it. Just address it. So speaking of being transparent, let's talk about communication and fair treatment. So on the notification side of things, clearly communicate the layoff process, the selection criteria, and the timeline to affected employees. Keeping any of these under wraps is only going to open up more questions. Now, sharing this information is going to be hurtful. When we talk about the layoff process, this is a painful process. When we talk about selection criteria, they're never going to feel like, oh, it was a good idea that you chose me. No one's ever going to be like, so glad that I was the one chosen. Or it makes perfect sense. Like they wanted this job. They felt like you wanted them. It's always going to be hurtful. Same thing with the timeline, not explaining to them what happens now and then what happens next. Keeping any of that under wraps may feel like that's easier to you, but it's not. As long as everything that you've done is fair and equitable, there's nothing wrong with communicating these things, and you need to do that. That's going to leave less question marks in an employee's mind, which likely will lead to less lawsuits. Okay, support services. I mentioned this earlier, but we want to offer outplacement services, counseling through, let's say you've got an EAP an employee assistance program through your benefits. You need to talk to your benefits broker or your insurance company to see if we can extend this for any impacted employees for, let's say, a month to 3 months, and then any other support to help affected employees transition out of the role. You can hire an HR consultant like myself or my team. We can do resume reviews for impacted employees. We can do coaching with them, mock interviews, so that way they feel like they have some transitional assistance and they're not just being put out in the cold. Okay. The last thing is handling disputes and legal claims through this process, and it very well may happen. So for dispute resolution, have a plan in place for addressing any disputes or legal claims that may arise from the layoff process. You're going through the process, then don't act like everything's going to be great and fine. Before you go through the process, set up what your plan's going to be to address these things and who's going to be the point of contact for it. Next is legal counsel. You need to be consulting with legal counsel throughout the process to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and to address any potential legal risks. An HR pro like myself, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I'm still going to advise you to run some things by an attorney. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've worked with an attorney on layoffs before. I've worked on an attorney on mergers and acquisitions. I've worked with attorneys on all kinds of, wrongful termination cases and things like that, discrimination cases, on and on and on. I've been deposed a whole bunch of times, so I have a good idea of what's going to be said. We can minimize the amount of time spent for review by buttoning all of this up on the front end, but you still need to consult with legal counsel to check those boxes. So some steps to ensure compliance. One, you need to do a legal audit. So conduct a legal audit of your layoff plan with the help of legal counsel, and then training of managers and HR personnel on legal requirements and fair treatment practices through the process. That's a must. We're not just going rogue here. Even newer HR employees aren't going to know what in the Wild West they're doing here. This is scary. And so we want to get them training, and especially our managers that aren't well versed in HR. I don't care if they've fired somebody in the past and they did a good job. This is a different ballgame. We need to give them training. Don't take for granted that they know what they're doing. Any of us could accidentally say something that spirals in a termination meeting. So we need coaching and guidance. Last, review your policies. So ensure that your company policies are up to date and compliant with current laws. Go back to your handbook before you do any of this and make sure that your handbook's up to date on your termination policies. By carefully considering these legal implications and taking proactive steps to ensure compliance, you can mitigate the risk of legal challenges and ensure a fair and transparent workforce reduction process. Look, reducing the workforce is never an easy decision, but by carefully considering these indicators and following the structured process, you can make a well-informed decision that aligns with the long-term health and strategy of your organization. I want to just close out by saying, I know this is tough. I just gave you an overview here, but there's also obviously a lot more to it. If you go to saltandlightadvisors.com/resources, we've got a suite of resources that we offer. One of the major ones that we offer are around employee layoffs and reductions in force. If you go to that website and scroll down a little bit, you're going to see an area where you can purchase layoff downloadables from me. Inside of this downloadable package, you're going to get a sample guide for employees experiencing a reduction in force or layoff. It's literally a whole packet that you can give them. We'd walk through it to make sure it's customized to your organization, but it's pages and pages of tools and resources and data for your employees. I've also got a sample guide for managers or supervisors with employees experiencing a reduction in force or layoff. And I've also got sample FAQs to share with employees experiencing a reduction in force and layoff. So that's in there for you. And then I've also got, separate than that, I've got employee layoff and reduction in force coursework. This is more of a DIY versus the other ones are downloadable tools and resources for you just to apply. This coursework includes how to walk through, I'm essentially training an HR leader or manager on how to navigate a reduction in force, layoff, or termination process. It would also be great if you've got an office manager or a management team that's going to be involved in it. I would have them go through this training. It's also got sample termination letters, sample exit interview processes, questions to ask, questions to avoid, all of that. And of course, we can always consult you and your organization on this. I know that thinking about things like this feels like absolute chaos in the business. It's not something that we ever want to do. And we say a lot like, oh, this is something that we're not proud of. This is certainly something that universally we can all say, this is kind of embarrassing. We've hired people and now we're having to let them go. That makes us look like we didn't do proper planning. It makes it look like we didn't do proper forecasting. It looks like a lot of things, but the reality of it is keeping these people on staff and driving your business into the ground to where you eventually have to close is far more irresponsible than just working through this and making it happen. If there's anything that I can do to help, I am very happy to do so. Don't feel like you're a bad person if this is what you have to do. This is a responsible business owner process that you need to do some research on and follow through with to make sure that you've got a sustainable business for the future, or that your business is set up for you to be able to sell to someone else. And then your remaining employees can still have a place to work, or your family has some, proceeds from the sale of your business because you've worked so hard all these years. This is nothing to be ashamed of. This is real business practices, and not talking about it is very irresponsible. So don't waste this chaos. Embrace it. Till next time.